Hi, I'm JJ, but nowadays I usually go by Talkie Pup. I've just got a couple quick little things I need to talk about before the video starts proper. I'd really appreciate it if you stuck around. I'll only be a couple minutes. It's been about 7-ish years since the last review I made came out, and the video you're about to watch has been in production for most of that time, since around 2013 or 14. The main reason for that is that around that time is also around when I first started to realise that I had depression and anxiety issues. For some of you, this might be a comeback for a reviewer that you just haven't heard much from in a really long time. But for me, it's the end of something that's been a major source of my mental health issues in some ways for the past 5-ish years, and it's also a transition towards something new. I'll talk a little bit more about what that means for future videos later, but for right now I just want you to keep a couple things in mind going forward. Most of the voiceover and the live action footage was recorded around 2016. I lived in my parents' place at the time, and I also look quite different now. Because of this, you might notice some shifts in audio quality throughout the video here and there. Usually I record the voiceover for a video all at once, in one go, to avoid differences in the way the audio sounds between each recording, but some of this audio in this particular video was re-recorded a few times in this house and some in my parents' place, and the old footage was from 2016, newer footage is from much more recently, 2018, 2019. But if I went back and re-recorded the entire script every time I wanted to make a little change, which happened quite a bit, then the video would never come out, basically. It'd be in production limbo forever, and we'd just be in a Duke Nukem Forever kind of situation. Similar sort of thing happens with some of the visuals as well. I wanted this video to sort of be a rebranding from JJ's Rambling Reviews to JJ's Ramblings, but from now on I'm going to switch just to going by Talkie Pup in videos as well, and some of what's in this video is going to have some of those same visual elements and things like that. But I'm not going to totally change everything about this video and turn it into the first Talkie Pup video, even though I could, because basically we'd be here forever. Think of this video as sort of a transition between the kind of person I used to be and the kind of videos I used to make, and where I want to go moving forward. So it's kind of in the middle, it's kind of a bit of both, and it feels like a bit of a patch-up job because of that, but I hope you still enjoy it. I recently started up a Patreon for this show. It's per creation, which means if I take another 7 years or whatever to finish another episode of this show, then you won't be charged anything. But however you have or haven't decided to support me over the years, it means a lot to me. So, thanks. When someone asks you what makes the worst Sonic games as bad as they are, what's one of the first things people think of? The glitches. Titles like Sonic Boom, Rise of Lyric and Sonic 06 are both unfinished, unpolished and completely broken messes, and they've become infamous for it. But then there are titles like Shadow the Hedgehog. With Boom and 06, you could at least say that they could have been great games with more development time, but Shadow was a finished, polished and finalized game, and it's just as bad as 06, maybe even worse. And while the game I'm reviewing today isn't quite that bad, Shadow isn't the only game to suffer in a similar way. Sonic Lost World tries to reinvent the 3D Sonic wheel yet again, and while titles like Adventure 2, Colors and Generations gave us perfectly round, functional, quality wheels, and Shadow's wheel is kind of a triangle shape, Lost World I guess is more of a pentagon than anything else. Wow, that analogy sucks.
If you've ever played Sonic Colors, then you probably know what to expect from the writing department in Sonic Lost World. Since the new batch of actors and writers were introduced to the series in 2010, the narrative has taken a backseat to comedy, and Sonic Lost World probably has the most comedy-focused cutscenes in the series yet. It brings back memories of the earliest Sonic Archie comics, as it's filled with puns which can be anything between so bad they're good to so bad they're just bad. Your mileage may vary.
That was cool. Pun entirely intended.
The writing and acting ranges from light and wacky cartoon hijinks to being a little more on the dry and direct side than some of the previous titles, especially for Mega Man. This guy has had enough of everyone's shit and it's glorious.
Boss, your hands!
As long as I can still strangle a Zeti, my hands are fine.
Similar things can be said about Tails too. It's crazy how much he's changed since his Sonic Adventure days. I'm probably putting much more thought into this than the writers ever did, but I have this headcanon that Colors and onwards take place a few years after most of what came before, and not just because Sonic had an actual canonical birthday in Sonic Generations. A major part of Tails' character in the older games was that he idolized Sonic. Sonic was his hero, and Tails wanted to, as his theme song would say, be like him. But as his character developed in the adventure games, Tails realized that he didn't need to be just like Sonic when he can be just like himself because he's fucking awesome. I view their interactions in Colors, Generations and Lost World as proof of that. Sonic isn't Tails' idol anymore, he's his equal and his best friend. Tails spends about as much time gloating about how good he is with technology or about how smart he is, as Sonic always has about his own abilities.
I've built a TV out of paper clips.
Yeah.
And reprogrammed a supercomputer using dishwashing detergent and a toothpick.
I know.
So look, fixing a propeller on a biplane, that's about as difficult as taking a nap.
For games that generally aren't very good at telling a story, Sonic and Tails' camaraderie, sense of self-worth, and overall character have felt stronger over these past several years than they ever have. As long as that pesky narrative doesn't get in the way. There are a couple of moments in Sonic Lost World where a number of characters, Tails especially, behave in ways that are strangely out of character for them. Attempts at drama and character development often feel forced as characters are placed into roles that don't suit them, resulting in writing that feels natural, funny and engaging during casual banter, but feels contrived and unnatural whenever shit hits the fan. Everything I said earlier about Tails and how much he and his relationship with Sonic has grown suddenly falls to pieces because Tails, out of nowhere, decides that Sonic trusts Eggman more than him, even after everything the two of them have been through together. So the story is a mess, but when comedy takes a forefront, the laughter makes for a welcome break from the frustration the gameplay often provides.
Sadly, all the positives I mentioned earlier mostly only apply to the recurring main cast members, Sonic, Tails and Eggman. Orbot and Cubot return, and they provide a welcome and similar taste of comedy and banter in their performances. But the new villain characters? Well, hope you like 2D Sonic games, because these guys are about as two-dimensional as you can get.
The Deadly Six are the quote-unquote true villains of Sonic Lost World. Natives from the game's setting, the planet of Lost Hex, these Skylanders rejects are initially under the control of Eggman thanks to this magic conch shell? I don't really get the significance of it being a conch shell, but whatever. Sonic disposes of the conch shell without really knowing what it does, and everyone suffers the consequences. These new villains are members of a species known as Zeti, but we never really see any other Zeti, therefore making that distinction completely pointless. They can also control Eggman's mechs, but I don't remember the game ever explaining exactly how or why.
As for the members of the Deadly Six, well, firstly there's Zaz, who should be kept away from children.
Where's that punk? I've been dreaming about pounding his sorry blue butt.
Then there's Zomom, an insulting stereotype of fat people.
One word of helpful advice: diet and exercise.
That's 3 words.
Master Zik, an insulting stereotype of the elderly.
Youth is truly wasted on the young. Speed cannot defeat wisdom, Hedgehog.
Xena, an insulting stereotype of women.
Oh, you're gonna pay for that! As soon as my nails dry.
Zor, a Linkin Park fan.
Getting bad news is actually the one thing I enjoy.
And Zavik, who has no personality at all. He's the leader of the bunch. And now for a history lesson. Rewind back to 2010 when we saw the release of Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 1, a game which attempted to revisit the Mega Drive days of 2D Sonic platformers. Afterwards came Sonic Colors, which brought back old enemies, Sonic Generations, a celebration of the series' 20th anniversary with remakes of previous games' levels, and then the second installment of Sonic 4 in 2012.
Enter 2013, and news that the next Sonic game will be a Wii U exclusive comes to light.
After Sonic's big birthday bash, Sonic fans are taking off their nostalgia goggles and getting hyped to see how the boost-focused gameplay styles of Unleashed Colors and Generations will evolve and... Oh hey, look! It's a Mario game! Looks like they're doing that nostalgia thing too. They sure are making a lot of money. Now, hear me out for a second. Maybe, instead of Sonic Team continuing their winning streak and refining and evolving their existing formula, maybe they could try and make more money!
Introducing Sonic Lost World, featuring such exciting levels as Green Hill Zone, Cold Green Hill Zone, Cloudy Green Hill Zone, Beach Green Hill Zone, and the worst level in Sonic 2. Don't forget the flickies, and of course everyone's favourite robots, the Badniks. Again, and 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 again, money!
So now we're stuck with Sonic Lost World, a weird mishmash of different ideas, some of which work and many of which don't. It borrows popular elements from old Sonic games, new Sonic games, and games that have nothing to do with Sonic, and tries to force them to work together, like a square peg in a round hole, in a failed effort to please as large an audience as possible. So Sonic can no longer boost, but instead he runs faster via the ZR trigger. Reminiscent of more recent 2D platformers such as Super Meat Boy and multiple Rayman games, Sonic moves rather slowly until the trigger is held, in which case he runs about as fast as, well, Meat Boy or Rayman, which is weird because speed is kind of meant to be Sonic's thing. I get more of a sense of speed and exhilaration from rushing through platforming challenges in Rayman Origins and Legends than I do running around at quote-unquote top speed in Sonic Lost World before a poorly placed enemy gets in the way or I get stuck on a wall or a ledge due to the game's broken parkour system. Yes, a parkour system. Because one or more new Assassin's Creed games every fucking year since 2007 just isn't enough anymore, is it? So Sonic Lost World has what I'm going to call Assassin's Creed 3 syndrome. One of the reasons why freerunning worked so well in the Ezio era of Assassin's Creed is that you had more control over the player character's actions via additional buttons. You could run with the right trigger, just like in Sonic Lost World, except if you want to run up walls or jump off a ledge, you have to hold down the A button at the same time. Then came Assassin's Creed 3, 4, and Rogue, which ditched the concept of a free run button entirely, making you automatically free run just by holding the trigger. In Assassin's Creed 3, Rebecca even tells you in the game itself that this is supposed to streamline the functionality of the Animus, or in other words, make the controls simpler. The problem with that is, even if you just want to run fast without climbing on anything, you'll just stick to a wall like a magnet to metal for daring to run near it. Or you'll find yourself automatically jumping around like a monkey on some random object that you try to run past. This is pretty much exactly the same problem that Sonic Lost World has. Your walking speed is painfully slow, so if you want to fucking get anywhere, then you'll be holding down the run trigger for like 90% of the game, which means anytime you even think about moving near a wall, Sonic will run up it by himself like a jackass. At times, Sonic will even decide to parkour up something even when you aren't holding the run button to begin with. Sometimes it'll be a minor annoyance, but on your first playthrough, the sketchy parkour system will get you killed at least once. All of this is assuming you can even understand how the parkour system fucking works in the first place. When Sonic runs into a wall, half the time he'll run along it Prince of Persia style, with jumping and spin dashes preventing gravity from kicking in. The other half of the time, he'll stick like Spider-Man, allowing the player to defy the laws of physics even more than usual, and climb around a bit before Sonic slips and falls. It sounds simple in theory, but in practice, it's incredibly awkward. Sometimes I want to stick to a wall and shimmy around, but if the angle the player approaches the wall is off by even a fraction of a degree, the player will run along the wall sideways instead and likely fall to their death. If the player is lucky enough to get stuck to a wall on purpose, they'll find that dashing left and right on it is performed with the jump button, which is also how the player disconnects from the wall and, once again, falls to their death. You seeing a pattern here? Over and over again in Sonic Lost World, When the player tries to do one thing, the game will decide that they're actually trying to do something else. And with most of the levels set in the skies, this means that you'll be running through the stage doing just fine when the game says, "Time to die now," and you die. Because the action that the player needs to progress through the game or nab that red star ring is tied to the same fucking button as the action that gets you killed. It's like if rings only sometimes healed you and then other times they just blew up. Oh right, they already did that. Twice. The new homing attack system is also really weird and broken. The player can now perform homing attack chains, where the game will automatically lock onto groups of multiple enemies at once instead of just a single enemy at a time, and all of the enemies in the chain are homing attacked automatically when a homing attack is performed once. This is an example of a recurring problem in Lost World: simplification and automation taking control away from the player, and often getting in the way of what the player actually wants to do. It's not uncommon for those homing attack targets to not appear when you want them to, or even worse, appear on another enemy far away that the player had no intention of attacking, and that in some cases may not even be on the screen. This is especially strange because targets rarely appear when the player tries to attack enemies that are between Sonic and the screen. This was probably done on purpose to stop those accidental off-screen lock-ons I was just talking about, and that would be fine if Lost World wasn't otherwise clearly designed with at least some small degree of backtracking and exploration in mind. I'll talk more about the level design later, but with as many hidden collectibles and alternate routes as there are in your average Lost World level, designing the player's primary form of attack, among other things, as though the player will only ever want to keep moving forward is pretty dumb. Sonic Lost World also introduces a new variant of the homing attack, the kick, which is activated by pressing Y instead of A. The kick is slower, and the player can only do one kick at a time, but it has the advantage of disabling the armor that some enemies have, so they can be hit with a homing attack afterwards. This is a fantastic idea to add an extra layer of depth to the gameplay, but that idea quickly falls apart due to one kinda obvious oversight. It's incredibly difficult to tell which enemies need to be kicked and which ones don't. Games like the Mario RPGs make it abundantly clear which enemies can or cannot be jumped on by placing harmful, spiky objects on top of enemies that can't be jumped on. But I guess Sonic Team thought it would be better to just let the player flip a coin to decide which attack to use. Only a small fraction of enemies actually need to be kicked, so the player will no doubt just homing attack the majority of the enemies without consequence, only to be randomly damaged by certain foes. The player shouldn't be punished for failing to understand something that's impossible to understand until they've already been punished. What's just as stupid is that the kick is mapped to the same button as the near useless bounce attack. If you want to kick an enemy, you'd better press Y at exactly the right time, or you're doing a bounce attack instead.
Many of the Wisps from Sonic Colors make a return in Lost World, further illustrating Lost World's design philosophy of cramming in as many well-received concepts from past Sonic games as possible, rather than establishing its own identity. Returning Wisps include
Rocket!
which you can now use in 3D with a motion-controlled aiming reticle,
Laser!
now with tilt controls,
Hover!
which thankfully hasn't changed much, and my personal favourite in both games,
Drill!
which makes the game play like Nights into Dreams for a little while. There are some 3D drill sections exclusive to Lost World, but the controls for these sections are annoying and slippery, and not just because they're underwater.
The new Wisps include
Eagle!
which lets you fly for a short while, even though Hover could already do that,
Asteroid!
which sucks up debris and uses it to jump higher, and
Rhythm!
a waste of time that isn't actually rhythmic for some reason. Many of the Wisps in Sonic Lost World initially required some kind of terrible motion controls, even the Wisps that were buttons only in Sonic Colors. But thankfully, downloadable updates for the game post-release added the ability to use regular controls for most of the Wisps. I especially despised Eagle at first due to its awful motion controls, but with an analog stick, it's actually not too bad, even if it's a little redundant. The fantastic post-release support is something that I have to sincerely thank Sonic Team for. I'm still not too fond of this game in general, but it's great that Sonic Team cares enough about its fans to at least fix some of the simpler issues that players had with the game, such as the Wisp controls or 100 rings not giving you an extra life. Not to mention 2 free DLC levels based on Yoshi's Island and The Legend of Zelda, both of which provide some neat crossover fan service and aren't bad levels either. Well, at least not for the standards that the rest of the game set. One of the first things you'll notice visually about Sonic Lost World is many of these levels look an awful lot like something out of Super Mario Galaxy. Galaxy, of course, isn't the first and only game to do planetoids and anti-gravity in a video game, but I think it's still important to compare some of the more three-dimensional levels of Sonic Lost World to that of Galaxy's, not to accuse Lost World of stealing ideas, even though it probably is, as much as to simply compare a game that does this mechanic right with one that often doesn't. Now, this whole anti-gravity planetoid concept might seem simple in theory, but is actually much more complicated to put into practice. In most 3D platformers, you're stuck to a conventional ground, and while vertical movement is still very important, you're always going to be falling back down, so the obstacles in front of the player are always a much higher priority than whatever's above or below them. This is something that most of us don't really think about, since that's just the way everyday human life functions on Earth. When games allow you to take to the skies or into space, vertical movement becomes a higher priority than it was before, and most good level design accommodates for that. But enter Super Mario Galaxy. Even though each section of Galaxy's gameplay is small and segmented, the area that makes up the entirety of the levels are usually very large and open areas, where you not only have to design levels around vertical and horizontal movement, but also around rotation, or in other words, shifting gravity. What makes much of Mario Galaxy so genius is how it subtly and cleverly designs the player's movements through its level design. Certain objects, geometry, and set pieces are carefully placed so that they attract the player to them, or clearly illustrated symbols are shown to the player to allow them to quickly comprehend where everything is in relation to everything else and what it does and means. Most people just aren't used to this kind of movement in reality, so it's very important for video games that utilize such movement to make gravity-defying leaps feel as natural to the player as walking across the street. Mario made the transition from regular platforming to planetoid gravity-defying platforming exceptionally well, but when Lost World's level design takes the player up and down all around, those little things that you don't even notice in Mario Galaxy become a whole lot more obvious. Navigating through Sonic Lost World's Lost World is a whole lot more confusing, at least for the explorative types who are after those hidden red rings or other goodies. The player can travel from the top half to the bottom half of many of the tubular planetoids at any time, but since the camera can't be in two places at once, the player can't see what they're running towards until they're already there, and they might end up taking damage from something that was impossible to notice until it's too late. This was never a problem in Galaxy, because those quick transition points are usually more limited and clearly marked, and something that could hurt the player is never placed too closely to these points, or they'll be led by a collectible or the camera's position, so the player will never be unfairly blindsided by an enemy because of these transitions. On the tubular planetoids of Lost World, however, these transitions seem to me like there were two separate hallway-style levels that were just stuck together to form a tube, with zero consideration into where the player would transition or what would be waiting for them on the other side. But, to be fair, all of this transitioning stuff only applies to certain levels. Yes, one of the biggest selling points for Lost World is its planetoids and anti-gravity, but in practice, there's a surprising number of levels that feature 2D platforming or other game mechanics where this sort of level design issue doesn't really apply. One of the many genius design decisions in the Sonic franchise as a whole is its multiple routes through each stage. In the 16-bit days, most Mario levels were a straight shot with a few secrets here and there. But Sonic stages had multiple paths through each level, where higher paths usually allowed the player to reach greater rewards in exchange for a greater risk of losing them. Continuing with the trend of old, each of Super Mario Galaxy's episodes are quite linear, providing the player with little choice as to which planetoid they'd like to travel to next, with a small number of hidden areas scattered around, whilst most modern Sonic games have branching paths, and Lost World is no exception to that. The problem with this system in Lost World all comes back to those levels with anti-gravity and planetoids everywhere. In 2D Sonic games, deciding which path to take is simply a matter of jumping up or falling down, but in much of Lost World, it's a matter of choosing to use this cannon or that cannon, this spring or that spring. The thing is, that player has no indication of where that cannon, series of springs, or whatever is going to take them until they've already followed that path with the automated cannon sequence and realised that the planetoid that they actually wanted to travel to is completely out of reach, and they have to either kill themselves or start the level all over again in order to get to where they wanted to go. Sonic Team has come a long way since Mad Space, but maybe not long enough. Sonic Lost World is definitely in the upper echelon of modern Sonic games in terms of production values. Everything looks great from a technical standpoint, with high-resolution models and textures running at a consistent 60 frames per second. And the art design is competent, overusing nostalgia, but giving it a little bit of a unique identity at times with the Lost Hex's hexagon motif. In the same vein as the Wisps or the ever-changing mechanics, the level design's basic building blocks are sometimes quite varied, usually in order to accommodate for a level-specific gimmick, but not always. The best part of Sonic Lost World's gameplay are the areas that contain little to no parkour and plenty of wide open spaces. Claustrophobic 2D sections where you're constantly getting stuck on walls and fighting against the controls are endlessly aggravating. But being freed from those sections, to be given plenty of room to breathe and ground to run on, with barely any walls to run up or other cheap gimmicks, feels fantastic. It's short-lived, but simply having the freedom to navigate through an open environment however I want, after being funneled through tight corridors and forced into using some annoying power-up, feels liberating. Despite being quite the opposite of open, and despite making a dreaded appearance in a certain other game, the rare muck speed sections are an absolute treat. Desert Ruin Zone 2, a level that contains nothing but free running and a mini-boss, is probably my favourite zone in the game. Sonic automatically runs forward as the player dodges left and right to avoid hazards, whilst occasionally free-falling or chaining a homing attack. No parkour, no wisps, no gimmicks. Just simple, pure fun. And it becomes bundled with the fantastic musical piece, Honeycomb Highway, the result of mixing the theming and instrumentation from the Honey Hive from Super Mario Galaxy with the jazzy trumpets and funky beats of Space Channel 5. Which is fitting because Tomoya Otani, who composed most of the tracks in Sonic Lost World, also composed a number of tracks in Space Channel 5 Part 2. Another level I love is Sky Road Act 2 for its pure and simple platforming. There are very few walls to get stuck on, just good old running and jumping to my favourite song in the game, Dragon Dance. A beautiful yet upbeat piece that would fit right at home in the Asian themed levels of Sonic Unleashed and Colors. And of course, who could forget the fan favourite Sea Bottom Segway, a beautiful piece with elegant piano work and sweeping strings that'll help calm your nerves in the two aquatic themed grinding levels, Tropical Coast Zone 3 and Lava Mountain Zone 2. The latter of which is one of the many stages that suffers from having a general theme that greatly contrasts the theme of the world. A water level in Lava Mountain, a cave level in Windy Hell, a bee level in Desert Ruins, a desert level in Desert Ruins. Pun notwithstanding, it's all pretty stupid.
And that's Sonic Lost World. A hodgepodge of all sorts of different ideas with some mediocre execution in a series that's already been suffering a sort of identity crisis for give or take 20 years. In the 5-ish years it's been since I started this project, we actually did see the release of that modern style Sonic Generations follow-up I've been hoping for in the form of Sonic Forces, and we also saw the release of a title for classic Sonic fans in the form of Sonic Mania. It's hard to say if these two separate games, including one with multiple playstyles, are in any way a sign of SEGA and Sonic Team learning their lesson from Sonic Lost World's failed attempt at appealing to all Sonic fans through a single main playstyle. It's even harder to tell what the future of Sonic may bring at this point. Will we get another Generations-style 3D game after the mixed reception of Sonic Forces? Will there be a Sonic Mania 2? Maybe it'll be something completely different like Boom, Adventure, or even Lost World. Either way, I think Sonic Lost World was an important stepping stone towards this series working out what it wants to become, and I'm looking forward to finding out what form the future of Sonic may take.